My brother called me at 2 a.m. and said, "Don't come home yet." I ignored him and drove straight to my house. Every light was off, but I heard my daughter crying upstairs. I ran to her room and froze when I saw who was standing beside her bed. My name is Michael Carter, and I still remember that night like it happened yesterday. I had been away on a short business trip, and all I wanted was to get home to my daughter, Emma. She was 17, and after losing her mother 2 years earlier, she had become the center of my world. Before we continue, subscribe to Behind Dad if you enjoy emotional family stories filled with secrets, betrayal, and unexpected twists. And a quick note, the pictures shown in this video are imaginative recreations made only to represent the story. They are not real photographs of the people or events. When my brother David called, I was already driving through our neighborhood. His voice sounded strange. He kept telling me to turn around, stay at a hotel, and wait until morning. I asked him what had happened, but he refused to explain. That only made me more afraid. I knew David well enough to understand that he wasn't scared easily. I parked outside my house and noticed something immediately. My front door was unlocked. I stepped inside quietly. The living room was completely dark. I called Emma's name, but nobody answered. Then I heard a soft sob coming from upstairs. My heart started pounding. I rushed up the stairs and followed the sound to Emma's bedroom. The door was slightly open. I pushed it wider and stopped breathing. Emma was sitting on her bed, crying uncontrollably. And beside her stood a man I never expected to see inside my home. It was David, my own brother. He looked at me and immediately raised both hands. "Michael, listen to me. This isn't what you think." I stared at Emma. She wouldn't look at me. Then David said something that made my blood run cold. "Your daughter knows what happened to her mother." Emma suddenly screamed, "Dad, please don't ask him." I felt the room spinning around me. For 2 years, I had believed my wife's death was a terrible accident. But judging by the fear in my daughter's eyes, I suddenly realized there was a part of that night nobody had ever told me. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak. I looked from Emma to David, trying to understand what I had just heard. My wife, Laura, had died 2 years earlier in what everyone called a terrible highway accident. I had spent months grieving, then slowly forced myself to accept that there was nothing I could change. But now my daughter was sitting on her bed, shaking, while my brother stood beside her like he had been protecting a secret. I asked David, "What does Emma know?" He looked at Emma. She whispered, "Dad, I didn't want you to find out like this." That sentence broke something inside me. I sat beside her and asked her to tell me everything. She wiped her tears and said that 3 weeks before Laura died, she had overheard her mother arguing with someone on the phone. Emma couldn't hear every word, but she remembered Laura saying, "You promised me you'd leave him alone." At the time, Emma thought it was about money. Then, the night before the accident, Laura gave Emma a small envelope and told her to hide it somewhere safe. Emma had kept it. I stared at her. "Where is it?" She pointed toward her closet. My hands felt cold as I opened a small wooden box beneath her clothes. Inside was the envelope still sealed. I recognized Laura's handwriting immediately. My eyes filled with tears. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed Laura standing beside a man outside a restaurant. The man wasn't David. I had never seen him before. The note contained only one sentence. "Michael, if anything happens to me, ask David what he knows about Daniel." I looked at my brother. His face had gone completely pale. "Who is Daniel?" I asked. David didn't answer. Emma suddenly grabbed my arm. "Dad, please don't make him tell you." I turned toward her. "Why?" She began crying again. "Because Uncle David promised Mom he would protect us." That was when David finally sat down. He looked exhausted, like he had been carrying something heavy for years. He told me Daniel had been someone Laura knew before we met. Daniel had disappeared from her life after she married me, but several years later he came back. According to David, Daniel had started contacting Laura again. He wanted money. When she refused, he began threatening her. I asked why nobody had told me. David looked straight at me and said, "Because Laura was afraid Daniel would hurt you." I couldn't believe it. Then I remembered something. 3 days before Laura's accident, she had asked me to change my usual route home from work. I had thought she was being overly cautious. Now that memory felt completely different. I asked David whether he believed Laura's accident was really an accident. He stared at the floor. Then he slowly shook his head. "No," my chest tightened. I asked him why he had never told me. He said he had tried to investigate Daniel himself, but someone had warned him to stop. Then he reached into his jacket and placed a small phone on the bed. "This belonged to Laura," he said. I stared at it. "What are you saying?" David looked at Emma, then at me. Your wife didn't die because of a random accident, Michael. He paused. She was trying to expose someone. And before I could ask another question, the phone suddenly lit up. A new message appeared. It contained only 4 words. I know you're home. The message stayed on the screen for several seconds, and none of us moved. I could hear Emma breathing beside me. David immediately locked the phone and told me to step away from the window. Why? I whispered. Because if that message is real, they know you're here. Those words sent a chill through me. I took Emma downstairs while David checked every door and window. I wanted to believe there was a simple explanation, but nothing about that night felt simple anymore. In the kitchen, Emma finally told me the truth she had been carrying for 2 years. She had seen someone outside our house the night before her mother died. She couldn't see his face, but she remembered a dark SUV parked across the street. Laura had noticed it too. That night, Laura told Emma to stay upstairs and lock her bedroom door. Then she went outside to speak with someone. Emma never heard the conversation. The next morning, Laura was dead. I felt sick. I asked why Emma had never told me. She looked down and said, Mom made me promise. She said if I told you, you might go looking for him. I couldn't blame her. She had only been 15. But I couldn't stop thinking about that envelope. Daniel, I asked David if he had ever found him. He nodded. His name isn't Daniel anymore. I stared at him. David explained that Daniel had changed his name years earlier. His real identity was Daniel Reeves, and he had worked with a company that had once handled some of Laura's business accounts. Laura had discovered financial records that showed someone had been stealing money from several clients. Daniel was involved. She had planned to expose him, but before she could, the threats began. David had kept investigating after Laura died. He eventually discovered that the accident report contained several details that didn't make sense. The vehicle that hit Laura had never been identified. There were no useful security recordings, and one witness had disappeared before speaking to police. I felt anger rising inside me. For 2 years, I had blamed myself. I had wondered whether I could have saved her. Now I realized someone else might have taken her from us. Then David told me something even worse. Michael, I didn't call you tonight because I wanted you to stay away from the house. I looked at him. Then why did you call? He hesitated. Because I found Daniel. My heart stopped. He said Daniel had contacted him earlier that evening. He claimed he wanted to meet. David agreed, hoping to get information. But Daniel never appeared. Instead, David received a message telling him that if he wanted to keep Emma safe, he needed to make sure I never returned home. I looked at my daughter. She was terrified. Then headlights appeared outside. A vehicle slowly stopped across the street. It was a dark SUV, exactly like the one Emma remembered. David immediately turned off the kitchen light. I pulled Emma behind me. Nobody spoke. The SUV remained there for nearly a minute. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He stood beneath the streetlight. I couldn't see his face clearly, but then he turned toward our house, and he raised his hand. He was holding something. David whispered, "That's Daniel." The man walked toward our front door. I thought he had come to finish what he started 2 years earlier. But when he reached the porch, he didn't knock. He placed a small envelope on the doorstep. Then he turned around and walked back to the SUV. David waited until the vehicle disappeared. He opened the door and picked up the envelope. Inside was a photograph. I looked at it once and immediately recognized the person standing beside Laura. It wasn't Daniel. It was someone I had trusted for years. My brother looked at me and whispered, "Michael, we have been looking for the wrong man." I stared at the photograph until my eyes began to burn. Standing beside Laura wasn't Daniel. It was my closest business partner, Stephen. For years, I had trusted him with my money, my company, and my family. I had even asked him to help Laura with some of her financial records after I became too busy with work. Suddenly, everything made sense. Laura hadn't been investigating Daniel alone. She had discovered that Stephen was using Daniel's old connections to move money through our company. Daniel had been helping him hide it. When Laura found out, she threatened to expose both of them. That was why she had been afraid. That was why she had asked me to change my route home. And that was why she had given Emma the envelope. David admitted he had suspected Stephen for years but never had enough proof. The photograph changed everything. Then we found something else inside the envelope, a tiny memory card. I inserted it into the computer. Laura's voice filled the room. "Michael, if you're hearing this, I'm sorry. I didn't tell you because I was afraid they would come after you. Stephen has been stealing from the company. Daniel helped him cover it up. I have evidence and I've sent copies to someone I trust." I could barely breathe. Then Laura said one final thing. Please don't try to get revenge. Protect Emma. Protect yourself. Let the truth do what anger never can. The recording ended. I sat there crying. For 2 years I had wanted someone to blame. Now I finally knew the truth, but there was still one question. Who had Laura sent the evidence to? David looked at the final file on the memory card. There was a name, a federal investigator. The next morning we contacted him. Within days, the evidence Laura had collected connected Stephen and Daniel to a large financial scheme. Investigators found records that proved they had been stealing money for years. Stephen was arrested. Daniel was arrested shortly afterward. The case also reopened the investigation into Laura's death. Months later, authorities determined that her accident had not been random. Someone had deliberately tampered with her vehicle. I don't think I'll ever forget hearing that. But I also learned something important. I spent 2 years believing my wife had simply been taken from me by fate. The truth was harder. Someone had tried to silence her. But Laura had planned ahead. She had protected me. She had protected Emma. And even after she was gone, her courage brought the truth into the light. Emma eventually stopped blaming herself. One evening, she sat beside me on the porch and asked, "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of us?" I looked at her and smiled through my tears. "She would be proud that you told the truth." David remained part of our lives, too. I never blamed him for keeping the secret. He had been trying to protect us, even though his silence had caused its own pain. As for me, I never became the angry man I thought I would become. I chose to rebuild. I kept Laura's photograph beside my desk. Whenever I looked at it, I remembered her final message. Don't let anger become the rest of your life. If you've ever lost someone you loved or discovered a painful family secret, tell me in the comments. What would you have done if you were in my place? And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with revenge. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through one hidden truth, one brave decision, and one person who refuses to let a lie control the rest of their life. I lost my wife that night, but I refused to lose myself too. And that was the greatest victory I could give her.